Good morning and welcome back to week 14 of child psychology. I am really excited with this semester. It's just been a great semester. You have been a wonderful class. And most of all, I'd really appreciate the way you have really tucked into our discussions and all, and doing the work and observing and reading literature and all of that which this class has presented you. And as I'm summarizing, as I'm coming up on the end, and we're now dealing with puberty, I want to remind you, excuse me, that really our main reason here in child psychology is to understand what makes us who we are as adults. Because as adults, we spend 80% of our lives as adults and only 20% as a children and adolescents. And all of that is going to shape who we are as adults, all that childhood and adolescence. And so the essence of understanding child psychology is not just understanding children, but is to understand adults. And what is it in childhood that goes to shape us and make us the adults that we are? Because who you really are is who you are as an adult. Who you are as a child or adolescent is you're just you're on the steps. You're still getting to be who you are, and so don't fool yourselves. Who we are as children is a poor example of who we really are as in our lives. For that reason, that's why we look at child psychology, because we want to understand what makes us really who we are. Okay, so leave you with that. We're now dealing with adolescence, and so we have this wonderful thing that happens to each one of us called puberty. Um, Puberty is important in child psychology to understand this is really the borderline between childhood and adolescence. Not that adolescence anymore makes us adults. It did hundreds of years ago, but it doesn't anymore. So what is it really in this institute? It's not even an institution, it's a happening called puberty that we don't have any control over. And what is it that's going to happen that's going to help to make us who we really are? Those are the questions that we'll be wrestling with these next couple of weeks. So my question last week is, what is it that contributes to people hitting puberty earlier and earlier and earlier as time goes on? I think when I was in high school or middle school, people were reaching puberty on the average of 13. Nowadays, it's about 10, a little over 10, between 10 and 11. You probably know people, if you were not one of them, who hit puberty at 8 or 9. And so this is the thing. What does it mean to hit puberty earlier than one's peers? How does that affect our development? But my question is really just wrestling with the different ideas of what is it that contributes. And I think I exposed you to videos that were particularly kind of ambiguous about this, or ambivalent. There are a lot of ideas. None of them really could we prove in any sense, because as soon as you say, oh, well, I have these 300 people who have hit puberty earlier and they have this one demographic um, factor in common, that doesn't necessarily mean that that factor is causing earlier puberty. It might just be making some contribution, though. And so Kevin mentioned there's really no scientific way of addressing this. Hannah, you mentioned the meat. That's usually always the first answer that we get, that young people eat steroid infused meat, or our diets involve a lot of these kinds of pumped up foods, whether it's meat, and sometimes it's the vegetables, because of the I guess you might call it like fertilizer or something that's in the soil. Um, Kelsey, you noted an interesting thing. Probably a lot of reasons, but just looking at people in our population, people are fatter. People are getting to be bigger and bigger. So why wouldn't that in some way contribute? Maybe it's not anything specifically we're eating, we just eating a lot, and that would definitely lead us along there. Um, you know, I think the real concern, I don't know that the concern is really that there's that, we reach puberty earlier and whatever, but there are some real physical concerns. I think, Jada, you mentioned that that hitting puberty early increases the chances of cancer. I know that in women, when they reach puberty early, increases their chances of an earlier onset of menopause. And an earlier onset of menopause usually means a longer period of menopause, and that's not always the most comfortable thing. Um, so there's that. From a psychological standpoint, I think one of the biggest concerns is not so much that we are physically changing, that children are physically becoming adolescents earlier, but the concern is, do they have what it takes psychologically to deal with this? One day people looking at you like, oh, that little kid, and the next day they're looking at you like, oh, you got a body. You know what I'm saying? And so, at what point are we